Alright, hello Astro subscribers, and welcome back to another video in the Vedic Lord series. And this is a very complicated and also very useful technique in astrology to figure out where the results of a certain house are going to come from. So if you don't know your house system, if you don't know your signs or where your planets are placed, go figure that out and watch my other videos on what all that means. And then you will have some insight into how to use this effectively. So just in the same way as how like first house lord is where your identity comes from, what part of the chart your identity comes from. Second house lord is where your money comes from. Third house lord is your manner of communication, where that comes from, what its qualities are. Seventh house lord is going to be where your relationships come from, and not just romantic relationships, but also like any sort of meeting, any sort of sale, any sort of any one-on-one communication, anything specifically where you're sitting across from another person, because seventh house is seventh from the first house, and that basically is the relationship of opposition. So anytime that you're sitting across from a person, they are your seventh house. You are your first house, they're your seventh. But you can gain insight into the sorts of relationships and one-on-one situations you attract by looking into the seventh house. Because obviously you can't meet everybody, so you have to have a filtering mechanism to decide what you're looking for. And you're looking for the seventh house. And your seventh lord is how that person in the who's signified by the seventh house and Venus and Jupiter, which are the Venus is the spouse of a man and Jupiter is the husband of a woman. So you can look at Venus and Jupiter placements per gender to see, as well as the seventh house, to see what this person's spouse is going to be like, likely. But yeah, your seventh house and all the planets in it and its ruler, these determine the types of relationships you have. So, and where these relationships come from in your life is related to the seventh lord. So, for instance, if you're, let's say, seventh lord is Mars. Say you're a Libra ascendant, your seventh lord is, your seventh house is Aries, your seventh lord, therefore, is Mars, because Mars is the ruler of Aries. That would mean that wherever Mars is in your chart is where that person that you're going to meet is going to come in from. So without further ado, let's get into it now that I've given the description, an example or two. Okay, so seventh lord in the first house, these people are going to be approached by their relationships. So people are going to come to them. Like, you could just be walking around and somebody will just randomly happen to find you, run into you, initiate a conversation with you. Man, woman, doesn't matter. The person who you're going to meet is very, very likely to come to you. Seventh lord in the second house, these people, you know how everybody says that, you need like money to get in relationships and whatnot? Well, that's partially comes from debilitated Venuses and whatnot and people having a pessimistic outlook, but it also comes from people with placements like this. And because some people, the main thing they do have to offer other people is their wealth, their money, and their physical attractiveness and their beauty, which is all of which is represented by Taurus. So yeah, unless Venus is exalted or some such thing in these people's chart, they are going to be very materialistic in relationships, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because like I said in my debilitated Venus video, you do need some aspect of material understanding in order to be successful in life. It's just not the highest virtue of Venus, but it is still necessary. So these people tend to gain relationships through as a result of their wealth. Seventh lord in the third house are going to be more traditional in their approach of a relationship, and these are the people who can win people over just by speaking. So in any type of situation where they're meeting people, they're going to have the ability, the gift of gab, the ability to communicate with people and get what they want, basically. Whatever that may happen to be, because remember, seventh house doesn't just represent marriage and relationships, it also represents sales and any deal or interaction between people. It also represents debts. Seventh lord and the fourth house are going to meet the people that they're going to meet in life disproportionately through being in kitchen type situations, being in or people coming to their house. What else? Any sort of domestic type situation. Generally, it's either restaurants or houses. A person could also approach their car, or they could give a person a ride back from a place, and then they will start a relationship through that type of situation. If these people want to increase their odds of meeting people, since this is one of the location-specific places, these people will do well to hang out in places that are both domestic and social, like coffee shops and whatnot in their area too, and they will meet people there more often. Seventh lord in the fifth house, these people meet people very, very well at musical type gatherings, creative type gatherings, art galleries, any place where there's art and there's a stage and there are people performing. It could even be like martial arts tournaments, because fifth house also rules competitive sports. It could be sports games, but generally anywhere where there's an environment of performance and or competition and a stage, these people are going to do very well. They'll do even better if they perform, because people are going to be naturally attracted to meeting them when they perform. So if you have a good chart for performance and you have this placement, this is a very, very good placement. So seventh lord in the sixth house. This is one of those interesting placements where people meet other people through a shared sense of purpose or service. They're very interested in having a partner or meeting people who align with their work goals and their service to human beings and to society in general. And so yeah, this is a good placement. It can also represent divorces, which is not as good, because sixth house again is 12th from the 7th, which means that 12th of anything is the absence of that thing or the loss of that thing. So these people, the flip side of seeking out that stable relationship with a shared vision is that if they don't do that, if they don't take the time to think through the pros and cons of the relationship in sort of an analytical way, they are liable to get divorced, and that's obviously bad. So do be sure, if you have seventh lord in the sixth house, to make an attempt to analyze the pros and cons of a relationship and not just jump into it based on your feelings, because you will generally suffer if you do that, if you have this placement. Seventh lord in the seventh house, these people meet people through sort of diplomatic interactions. They can meet people through therapy, whether they're on the receiving end or the delivering end. They can meet people through sales. They can meet people door-to-door sales. They can meet people through website or apps like Snapchat or social media. Anything where you're initiating a one-on-one conversation that has the potential of a disproportionate potential for these people of evolving into a long-term relationship. Seventh lord in the eighth house. These people have a desire to meet people who have a sort of revolutionary or explosive mindset. They like people who are into dark things, deep things, sort of strange things, complicated things. These people also tend not to talk a whole lot in relationships, because for them, actions speak louder than words. And in order to get to know somebody, they would basically rather get physical with them right away, because they don't really see the point in talking too much, because to them, like I said, the person will be known by their actions and how they respond to the scariest thing that two people can do together, which is basically to like get physical and whatnot. So this isn't just a sexual thing, it's also a getting to know the other person thing. And also these people tend to be pretty interested in managing joint assets. So that doesn't necessarily mean they want to provide all the money in the relationship or use the other person's money in a relationship, but they do want to manage, they'll have some sort of peculiarity about finances, management, and relationship, whether that's, you know, managing the other person's money as well as their own, or keeping the money entirely separate and not even discussing that kind of thing. And that would just depend on the planet that's ruling the 8th house. So for a Gemini ascendant, they tend to be so independent that they want to keep the finances separate. But for some other type of person, they might be more interested in sharing everything and keeping very, very close records on that. So that's another part of that this placement that is interesting. Okay, so 7th Lord in the 9th house. These people meet their partners and the people that they're going to meet either in an education type situation, a classroom, or they fall in love with their teacher or professor, and they're in a non-romantic sense, they're very, very good at getting to know their educators, the people who are leaders in their philosophical movement or community or whatever. And so yeah, these people tend to go in for people who are teachers or who have the same type of educational background that they do. Whatever that might be is going to be determined by their Jupiter placement. 7th Lord in the 10th house, these people they're going to meet another person while doing the tasks throughout the day that are facilitating their purpose. The best thing these people can do to meet people in romantic sense and otherwise is to obligate themselves and fulfill their social duties, whatever those might be. It's going to be represented by the 10th house, the planet that rules the 10th house. And I'm going to get into divisional charts later, or probably next. And when I do the C3, or the otherwise known as the D10 chart, that's going to be instrumental in figuring out what your purpose and obligation is. So I'll get into that later. But for now, just know that whatever your obligation to society is going to be ruled by your 10th house, Saturn, and the planet that rules the 10th house in your star chart. And you will meet people while you are, to the degree that you are carrying out your duties. 7th Lord in the 11th house, people tend to get pulled off into one-on-one conversations after they do a mass event. So these people, because 11th house is the house of mass communication, if you are in a position where you are speaking in front of a large group of people, somebody in that crowd will find you attractive, generally speaking, and they will be more liable to approach you afterwards, and then you guys can get pulled off into your own little world. So that is, it's kind of the flip side of 7th Lord in the 5th house, whereas if these people perform, they can tend to meet people, but these people, they sort of fall in love with their audience, and that can be a good placement, but it can also be sort of a depersonalizing placement because they meet so many people, they have a hard time deciding between which ones to invest more time in. And 7th Lord in the 12th house, these people tend to meet people when they go into isolation or have kind of a hard time. So these people are going to be drawn toward the private places of the world, and while most people might never meet somebody in the private places of the world, be that nature or even like medical facilities or places where they're going through a hard time. Like if I know so many people who have placements like this, who have met people through their long-term life partner through going through a situation of being like homeless and on drugs. That doesn't mean you have to meet people that way, but being in nature is sufficient to trigger this. But one of the downsides of this is it's very difficult to be alone because people will approach you while you're alone with this placement, and or they have a higher probability of doing that. So, and also if you go on retreats that have like a spiritual nature to them, like a Vipassana or something like that, it can be very a good way to meet new people. So, which is kind of counterintuitive because spiritual retreats and whatnot are generally meant to do work on yourself. But such is the nature of Venus, where um, Venus is exalted in Pisces, even though it's not necessarily the happiest in Pisces, because Venus and Pisces people are not necessarily the most beautiful, but what they are is spiritual healers, which is the highest function of Venus, is to love everybody and provide spiritual healing and wisdom through Venus's immense power. But, like I said in my Exalted and Debilitated Venus video, Venus is not happy in Pisces. Venus is happiest in signs like Virgo and Leo, where it's slightly debilitated, but it gets to be beautiful. But in Venus and Pisces, it's fulfilling its highest obligation by meeting many, many types of people and offering them love and wisdom and guidance universally. So that was my video on the 7th house lords through the various signs. And if you find this to be accurate, if you are in a relationship and you met them through the way that I described that refers to your chart, please let me know. Drop a like, subscribe in the comments. So yeah, till next time.